Pase, por favor. Salga. Vale, los tres. Tranquilo. Aquí, señor. Fuera. Tranquilo. Listo. Ven aquí, ¿traes armas?
When El Chapo's son, Ovidio Guzman, was arrested in 2019, he appeared calm and even told his soldiers to put down their weapons.
Diles que paren todo.
But it's not all as it seems. Ovidio was arrested twice, in 2019 and 2023. Both times his arrest resulted in a massacre. Let's explore the contents of these incidents and where Ovidio Guzman is today. By the time Ovidio Guzman was born in March 1990, his dad was already a notorious drug lord and one of Mexico's most wanted men. Ovidio is the son of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and his second wife. El Chapo would go on to have 4 wives and up to 24 kids, but only his 4 eldest sons would get roped into his trade and made heirs to his Sinaloa cartel throne. This might sound glorious, but in psychological terms, it's just called grooming. El Chapo exposed his sons to unspeakable violence and made them partake in it from a very young age. Ivan and Jesus, El Chapo's eldest, started doing his dirty work when they were still children. Following Ovidio's arrest in 2023, this is what was revealed. Once information was obtained by these captives, typically through torture, these individuals were killed, either by or at the direction of the Chapitos themselves, and the bodies disposed of throughout the area. While many of these victims were shot, others were fed dead or alive to tigers. For approximately 2 hours, members of the Chapitos tortured victim 5 by inserting a corkscrew into victim 5's muscles, ripping out one of his muscles, and placing hot chilies in his open wounds and nose before being shot dead by Ivan Archibaldo Guzman Salazar, the incident alleges. The victim and his fellow slain officer were then dumped near a motel off a highway near the ranch. Ovidio and his 3 brothers were groomed to perfection by their father. They took pleasure in feeding people to exotic pets, which, by the way, are not supposed to be kept in a cage in Mexico. But way before that, Ovidio was an innocent kid. When he was 5, Ovidio's parents enrolled him at the Colegio Seca, or the Adusco Center for Education and Culture. This was a private Catholic school held by the Legionaries of Christ. But Ovidio was already tainted in the eyes of his classmates and teachers. 2 years before, in 1993, El Chapo was arrested for the first time and sentenced to 20 years in prison for drug trafficking and bribes. Everyone at Ovidio's school knew his dad was in prison, and everyone had heard of El Chapo. He was a ruthless criminal who used violence as a means to an end with ease. They were afraid of El Chapo, and by association, they were afraid of his family. It's not like Ovidio could have done much at age 5 if someone got on his toes, but what if he told his dad about it? So Ovidio was excluded from all social events, like kids' birthday parties or school trips. Once the school organized a trip to Disney World. This was a big thing and the kids were very excited about it. Ovidio was too, but he was never invited. He found out from his schoolmates who were talking about the trip at every chance they got. When Ovidio's mother found out, she was desperate to get her son included. She offered the school to pay for everyone's rooms in exchange for Ovidio's invitation, but the school declined. Imagine the leverage the Sinaloa cartel would have over the head teacher if they accepted. The school did the right thing, but Ovidio never ceased to feel excluded and isolated. So after he finished 6th grade and got his school picture taken, he dropped out of school for good. The only option for him was a life of crime. Since everyone already put the criminal tag on him, he might as well lean into the role. Just like the rest of El Chapo's sons, Ovidio became engulfed in his father's work from a very young age. By the time he was 18, he had an important role in both the production and trafficking of narcotics. After El Chapo's arrest in 2016, this would come in handy. Ovidio and Jesus would expand the Sinaloa cartel to unprecedented levels by improving the production of labs and adding smuggling routes and means of transport. But let's head back a few years. In 2012, Ovidio and his older brother Ivan were put on a do not deal list by the United States Treasury Department. Their American assets were frozen, and the brothers were forbidden from making deals with American citizens. And 2 years later, El Chapo was arrested a second time in Mexico. He'd been on the run for 13 years after his first prison escape in 2001. In 2015, he organized his second prison escape by digging a tunnel under his prison shower, the only place without security cameras. But less than a year later, he was arrested a third time and extradited to the US. No amount of bribery, lawyers, or intimidation would get him out of the ADX Florence federal prison. It's the highest security prison in the US, and the worst of the worst are held there, in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day. This might explain the expression on his face when he landed in the States. In July 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison. He will also have to pay over $12 billion in forfeits. The DEA and the Mexican authorities were over the moon, expecting the Sinaloa cartel to crumble under the arrest of their notorious leader. But by 2016, his sons were more than ready to take over, and in fact, make the Sinaloa cartel even richer.
They are known as Los Chapitos, the four most trusted sons of the world's most notorious drug kingpin. As the I-Team has reported for several years, federal drug investigators here in Chicago consider El Chapo's sons in charge of the Sinaloa cartel that remains this area's largest trafficker of heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamines.
And Ovidio, aka El Raton, also made headlines with his exceptionally ruthless behavior.
They now say this drug lord, nicknamed the Mouse, has ordered the murders of informants, a rival drug trafficker, and a popular Mexican singer who refused to perform at his wedding.
Imagine being caught between a rock and a hard place like that. If you say yes to the invitation, you might get shot or forced into despicable work dynamic. If you say no, you might get shot for rejecting an arrogant drug lord. Ovidio's reaction is strangely imminent of the Disneyland school incident. His school was also stuck in a difficult situation back in the 1990s. Except now, Ovidio could order assassinations when he feels rejected. Ovidio, Ivan, and Jesus expanded El Chapo's business by building new, more profitable labs and expanding the trafficking routes from the US to the whole world. They also bought huge quantities of ephedrine from Argentina. This is an ingredient used in making meth. Of course, the DEA wasn't going to let this slide. They charged Ovidio with conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine, white powder, and weed into the US. Ovidio and Ivan were just preparing for a massive shipment: 5 kilograms of coke, a ton of cannabis, and 500 grams of meth. In October 2019, 3 months after El Chapo received his life sentence, the DEA led a huge movement against Ovidio Guzman in collaboration with the Mexican military. The plan was simple: find Ovidio, arrest him, and extradite him to the US. He was to face the same fate as his father. But it wasn't that simple, not for a long shot. Ovidio and Ivan would turn Sinaloa into a bloody war zone. On October 17, 2017, the Mexican military localized both brothers. First, they went after Ivan, but he was 1 minute quicker than the military. He escaped and rallied up his army, hundreds of sicarios armed to the teeth, and in the early hours of the morning, the military surrounded Ovidio's house. Ovidio initially started shooting at the officers. Of course, the officers shot back, and Ovidio soon realized he was heavily outnumbered, so he came out with his hands up.
Pase, por favor. Vamos los tres. Tranquilo. Aquí, señor. Fuera. Tranquilo. ¿Traes armas?
But news of his arrest traveled fast, and within minutes, Ivan's army rained hell on the officers at Ovidio's house. Shockingly, it was Ovidio who seemed to try to stop it. But stopping is not the Sinaloa way. And here's the thing: even though Ovidio was arrested and taken away, the Sinaloa assassins continued to kill officers and destroy the city in order to send a message. The sicarios released cartel prisoners, set fires to cars to block important roads, and invaded the local airport. Trade and travel were completely stopped in the Sinaloa region for hours. 7 officers and 1 civilian were killed, and the surviving civilians were instructed to hide in their homes. The cartel were imposing a curfew on the town until Ovidio would be released. Sadly, it worked. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador ordered Ovidio's immediate release to prevent further loss of life. This sends the wrong message, that authorities are easily intimidated and the cartel is in control. Falco Ernst, senior analyst for the International Crisis Group in Mexico, said the release of Ovidio Guzman set a dangerous precedent and sent a message that the state itself, including the army, could be blackmailed and was not in control. President Obrador explained his decision.
De un delincuente que las vidas de las personas.
This decision was taken to protect citizens. We cannot fight fire with fire. We do not want deaths. We do not want war. But then there is the famous war on drugs and the bloody cartel wars. Letting cartels do whatever they want to do for fear that they might do worse only means letting them win. However, Ovidio was not just acquitted of his crimes. He was still on the DEA's radar, and the Mexican government was still thinking of a way to arrest him without bloodshed. In 2022, there was a $5 million reward on the captures of Ovidio and Ivan, and a $15 million reward for the arrest of El Mayo, the other leader of the Sinaloa cartel. This didn't mean much to the Los Chapitos, even though they were supposed to live in hiding. They continued to run production and oversee trafficking, maintaining the Sinaloa cartel as Mexico's most powerful criminal organization. Meanwhile, the DEA was tracking their every movement and planning a much more complex and better organized raid. So in early January 2023, 200 special forces conducted a joint operation and arrested Ovidio Guzman for a second time. Finally, there was an announcement.
The Sinaloa drug cartel that supplies a majority of Chicago street drugs has been a like father, like son operation for years, especially since Joaquin Guzman, the drug lord known as El Chapo, was put away for life in a U.S. prison, and his son Ovidio held some of his dad's power and wealth.
Yep, it was even worse this time. 29 people died in just a few minutes in an attempt to capture El Chapo's son. This is the brutal fate of those on the side of justice. And this time, the Sinaloa sicarios were even more violent than in 2019. They even went into the Culiacan airport and shot at civilian planes.
And, that's our focus. Unfortunately, the Sinaloa cartel is producing most of the fentanyl that comes into the United States.
Last April, well before Chicago's DEA Special Agent in Charge Robert Bell retired, he signaled the full press underway for all 4 of El Chapo's accused drug trafficking sons as the I-Team email addresses for Los Chapitos information. Ovidio Guzman, El Chapo's oldest son, considered the leader of the cartel's fentanyl division. Since his arrest on Thursday, Mexican media now reporting 10 soldiers killed along with 19 cartel operatives.
In the eyes of the cartel, this was a simple tit for tat, but Ovidio was arrested anyway, and dozens of people died in a disproportionate act of revenge. Mexico is a constant war zone thanks to the war on drugs and drug lords like El Chapo and his family. Ovidio was taken to a military helicopter and transported to Altiplano prison, the same high-security prison in Mexico that his father had escaped from twice. But today, the Altiplano prison has much stronger security. It's highly unlikely Ovidio will ever get out. And there's another twist to this. As of 2023, Mexican authorities plan to extradite Ovidio Guzman to the US. He will likely face a similar fate as El Chapo. But if he's thrown inside the Florence Supermax prison, it won't be a happy family reunion. He won't even get to see his dad. ADX Florence inmates spend 23 hours in solitary confinement, and their free hour is also spent alone, in the presence of correctional officers, shackled from head to toe. Prisoners even eat alone, except for the last 3 years of their sentence. El Chapo will never get this privilege, as he's serving a life sentence. But will his son? President Obrador once again defended the operation, except this time, it seemed like he changed his perspective. It was worth a few casualties to close an entire chunk of the Sinaloa cartel.
We regret the loss of lives of those who died while carrying out their jobs. We also regret other losses.
But even with Ovidio behind bars, the war is far from over. His arrest was an incentive for the Sinaloa cartel to bring even more chaos and destruction to the Sinaloa region.
Violence broke out across the state following the arrest of one of the leaders of an infamous criminal gang. Ovidio Guzman Lopez is the son of the notorious drug lord dubbed El Chapo. The arrest comes just days before US President Joe Biden is due to visit Mexico.
That's right, and this is not a coincidence. According to CNN, Ovidio's arrest was also a way for the Mexican government to show the US that they are in control, that they will not be bribed or intimidated by cartels anymore. It also diffuses the power behind any ask from the Biden administration to stem the tide of fentanyl and other narcotics across the border. It seems like the only way to take down the Sinaloa cartel and Los Chapitos is to accept the fact that people are going to die for it. Officers, officials, and civilians will pay the ultimate price for a group of power-blinded men whose pride and violence overshadow what's left of their humanity. Hey, thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on Ovidio's 2 arrests? Could it have been done any other way? Let us know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.